The world's 5 leading emerging economies are meeting in Johannesburg, South Africa for the 15th BRICS Summit. The 5 BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, will discuss cooperation in various fields, new growth opportunities, and sustainable development for the Global South. You're watching CGTN special program on the BRICS Summit. I'm Zhongshi, live in Beijing. Joining me on our program today, Qu Qiang, a research fellow at Beijing Foreign Studies University, and political and economic affairs commentator Einar Tanyan is also a senior fellow at the Taihe Institute. Gentlemen, fantastic to have both of you on today. South Africa is hosting this year's BRICS Summit from August 22nd to the 24th at the Sandton Convention Center in Johannesburg. First, let's check in with CGTN reporter Zhao Yunfei in Johannesburg. Yunfei, tell us more about President Xi Jinping's agenda on this trip.
Well, Zhongshi, I'm here in Sandton, and it's part of Johannesburg, and this is the area where the upcoming BRICS Summit is being held. And clearly, if you walk on the streets, you can easily feel the atmosphere over here. Everywhere you can see the BRICS Summit logo, as well as the Chinese flag. It's a welcome gesture by Johannesburg, as President Xi, well, we just learned that he has touched down in Johannesburg. Now, you asked about the agenda of President Xi. His agenda for the upcoming 4 days is very, very tight, but generally can be split into 3 parts. First is his state visit to South Africa by the invitation of South African President Ramaphosa. And he certainly will going to attend the upcoming BRICS Summit, and he will also host a dialogue between the leaders of China and African nations. Now, this is a very important event, as President Xi has just published a letter on local media outlets, and he celebrated the long-lasting ties between South Africa and China. It really goes beyond the 25 years of diplomatic ties. President Xi mentioned as early as mid-20th century, the newly founded People's Republic of China support how South Africa fighting against apartheid. He also mentioned about how China is supporting South Africa in giving supplies, anti-pandemic supplies facing the coronavirus. And then President Xi also cherished his personal ties with President Ramaphosa. He says the 2 leaders have been always standing together, working on the issues that related to the core interest of the 2 countries. So in this article, President Xi said that he's looking forward to this visit, could chart the plan for a new chapter of the development of the 2 nations. Now, South Africa has been positively preparing for the upcoming BRICS Summit, and there are several points of significance. First of all, it's first of its kind of meeting summit after the 3-year COVID pandemic, and also South Africa as the host country taking this opportunity invite leaders of all South African nations, as well as leaders of some of the countries from the Global South. So this is certainly something under the theme of cooperation rather than confrontation that really reflects a high demand of a reform of a global, the governance of global governance. Now back to you.
CGTN's Zhao Yunfei live in Johannesburg at the Convention Center for us monitoring things. Yunfei, we appreciate that update from you. Thank you. And let's talk about all of this with my guests here on our program. Gentlemen, this is an important summit, an important in-person meeting between the leaders of BRICS members. Mr. Qu, let me start with you. What are your expectations on what's going to happen, what's going to come out of the BRICS Summit this year?
Well, just take a look at the theme of the forum. Well, we need to accelerate the reform of the world economy, especially from the angle of the emerging economy, from the new development partners. Right now, if we take a look at the economic sentiment of the whole world, I think more than ever, we need the new development partners like the BRICS countries.
Mr. Xu, sorry to interrupt here. We just got word that the Chinese president has touched down in Johannesburg. Just wanted to get that information out to our viewers. The Chinese president has touched down. We'll be bringing you live pictures from the airport in just a few moments. Please go ahead, Mr. Qu.
Oh, yes. Just as I mentioned, more than ever, we need to bring the new development partners, especially the emerging markets, the BRICS countries, BRICS plus countries, to jointly form a force to bring back the world economy back online. This is very important to the world economy right now, since the Western countries are facing a potential recessions in the economy. And also, more than ever, politically, I think we need more angles to form the multilateralism in the new international orders, because everybody knows if we only have one or two angles, the whole arrangement of the international geopolitical pictures will not be stable, tilting right or tilting left. But with the participation of the BRICS countries and the new development partners, I think the whole world will facing a new vision in the future and it's going to be more stable. So I think these are all the topics we're going to discuss during the meetings, during the talks between the leaders, between China and Africans, between China and other BRICS countries. So I think this is vitally more important because we really need new narratives. We really need new stories and new visions in the current tumbling world, especially when we're facing the recovery or facing the rebuild of the international orders.
These are complex and challenging times when you look at the economic context here, and those five members represent the global south. Given those circumstances, what do you think will make up the mandate for BRICS this year?
Well, it's a very complex situation because what you have is a grouping that has power because it is these middle powers. But if you dilute that too much, if it becomes everybody on the table, unfortunately, there'll be so much food, but many, many mouths to feed. So at this juncture, they really have this struggle. How do you come together, as my colleague said, establish a new way of doing things, inject some vitality into the economy, but at the same time, make sure that the grouping doesn't dissolve into mush. And I really mean that in the sense that you can't expect the middle powers, although they have more GDP than the G7, they do not have the same wealth. And the fact that the G7 has largely abdicated does not mean that they should be held off the hook. The middle powers have to put pressure on the G7 grouping, the people who benefited from exploiting the global south, to come back to the table. The $100 billion a year that they promised for climate change hasn't materialized, only 1/10 of it. And a lot of those projects are questionable. They seem to be helping entities that are already very wealthy, as opposed to the countries that are in need. So this is a complex dance that's going on. The middle powers are trying to assert themselves. They have to make sure that they maintain that kind of focus and at the same time have the ability to satisfy those who are aspiring to develop and those who have already developed.
All right, gentlemen, we'll talk more as we get along here on our special program here. But for now, the BRICS Summit especially focuses on the economy. As representatives of emerging markets and the developing world, BRICS nations uphold key values such as openness, inclusiveness, and mutual benefit. Let's now go live to Robert Nagila in Johannesburg for the very latest. Robert, talk to us about preparations in Johannesburg.
Absolutely. Well, it's been months of preparations leading up to this point in time, the eve of the 15th BRICS Summit here in Johannesburg. And officials are telling us that they are ready to host this summit. They're satisfied with all the preparations, and they say that all that's left now is for the leaders to arrive and for the summit to begin. Now, what I can tell you is that there's a heavy security presence in Johannesburg tonight. For obvious reasons, you've got three heads of state arriving in this city, part of the summit itself. Earlier today, there was a security cordon thrown around the convention center where the summit will take place. You had security sweeps going on, and inside the convention center, no one was allowed in there because they say that they had to carry out those sweeps to ensure that everything was in place and that there were no surprises or unexpected surprises. So tonight, it's very quiet around the city. as everybody waits for the leaders to arrive and for the summit to begin. Now, my colleague Sun Yi has also been around the city in the last couple of days. Could you just tell us what you've witnessed in your rounds in the city?
Now, I spent the last 3 days at the BRICS Business Council. Now, that's the place in the South African Trade Minister's words. That's the place that the best of BRICS ideas, BRICS products, BRICS growth opportunities gets gathered and gets amplified. And he also said this is the place that we get the sense how BRICS makes the world a better place. And we've been talking to people in those meetings. One of those people from China, the Chinese delegation, said after 3 years of online talking, for the first time in 3 years they're talking offline, she felt there's a very high sense of trust and honesty between one another. She said when talking with the BRICS nations delegates, the people, they're not only sharing their best practices, but they're also honestly sharing their pitfalls,
Absolutely.
the lessons they learned the hard way in operation. And that's the kind of trust that she said is really, really valuable. And we expect to see that kind of trust and high level of honesty in the summit in the next few days too. Another thing that's I've been reading the past day is that Chinese President Xi Jinping has published a signed article in local media today. And of course, South Africa is not new to Chinese President Xi Jinping. This will be his 6th visit here. And in this article, the president said every time he comes to South Africa, the nation of rainbow, he has found new things, new impressions here, but also always he has found a brotherly sentiment here in South Africa. And of course, we are going to see that in the next few days too. Now, Robert, the summit, the BRICS Summit, is officially starting tomorrow. What can we really expect from the next few days?
Well, it's a packed agenda. There's a lot of items that they need to go through, and they do not have a lot of time. But one of the main items on this agenda is the expansion of the BRICS. This is a topic that there's been in discussion for a number of years, and it's coming to a head now. And focus is not just going to come from within South Africa. There's going to be a lot of focus from outside South Africa as well, in Europe, in America, in the Americas as well, because but we know that as of this point, we've got at least 23 countries that are seeking to become members of the BRICS bloc, the BRICS family, from Argentina to Iran to countries in Africa as well, because the benefits from this organization that are shared across the membership potentially are huge, and this could spark a totally new revolution, so to speak, in terms of economic, trade, and culture, as well as just a community, building up a new community with a shared mindset. So this is huge and could potentially rival other organizations, for example, like the G7, for example. So there's a lot of focus on this. People are going to be paying attention at what comes out of this particular summit. And just to add on to what you said earlier, there's a lot of people that share the sentiments of President Xi Jinping in terms of every time you visit this country, it's a wonderful country, the way the people welcome you here. It's a beautiful culture as well, and you just simply feel at home. So absolutely amazing place to be. And this is not the first time that South Africa is hosting the BRICS Summit. So it's something they've done before. They know what to do. We're basically expecting thousands of people converging at one point. So coordination is key. Time factor, we know that everyone's been allocated their time slots when you have to speak, how long you have to speak, because they need to move on. There's a lot to unpack in a very short space of time.
And then, of course, when you talk about the community, more people from other countries are coming. In the past few days, I have seen not only people from the BRICS countries, they are here, but also so many from all across Africa. Of course, this time, the BRICS Summit, they've invited so many leaders across Africa to come. And this is the BRICS Summit that comes under the theme of BRICS and Africa, mutually accelerated growth, sustainable development, and inclusive multilateralism. We also know that Chinese President Xi Jinping and South Africa's President will be co-chairing and co-hosting the China-Africa Leaders Dialogue in the next few days. So, of course, all eyes will also be on Africa's participation on the African continent, and that's going to really be big in the next few days too.
Absolutely. So the intent is there. All that remains now is for everybody, all the participants, the leaders to come together, begin the deliberations, the summit to kick off, and all eyes will now be on what comes out of this summit. There's going to be a lot of interest from everywhere around the world to see where the BRICS moves from here. A historic moment probably in the making. Back to you.
Robert and Sonia, we appreciate that preview. We'll be counting on the both of you in the next couple of days for more details on the BRICS Summit. Thank you so much. And if you're just joining us here on CGTN, you're looking at live pictures of the airport in Johannesburg, South Africa, where Chinese President Xi Jinping touched down minutes ago, officially beginning his trip to the 15th BRICS Summit, hosted by South Africa this time, as well as a state visit to the country at the invitation of President Cyril Ramaphosa. We're monitoring the situation for you right here on CGTN. We should be able to see the Chinese president exit the cabin in just a few moments' time, so make sure you do stay with us right here on CGTN. And a little bit more information about this trip. The Chinese president left Beijing on Monday to attend the 15th BRICS Summit in Johannesburg and pay a state visit to South Africa. President Xi is visiting at the invitation of South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa. While in South Africa, the two leaders will co-chair the China-Africa Leaders Dialogue. There we can see the plane carrying the Chinese president. It's just past 11 p.m. local time there in Johannesburg. So a lot of dark background there at the airport. But this is the plane carrying the Chinese president, who will be beginning his trip to BRICS, as well as a state visit to South Africa. The theme for this year's BRICS Summit is BRICS and Africa, Partnership for Mutually Accelerated Growth, Sustainable Development, and Inclusive Multilateralism. The scale of the summit is huge. Many leaders of African countries have also been invited to attend. One of the highly anticipated focuses is the discussion over whether the bloc will admit other large developing countries to join the mechanism. 23 countries have submitted official membership applications. Along with Xi Jinping, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi are expected to attend this summit. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will attend on behalf of President Vladimir Putin. Let's talk about this trip with my guests here on our program, Anar Tangen and Qu Jian. Mr. Qu, we've talked about your expectations about what's going to come from this summit. I mean, for those member countries now, they face a very complex reality of the world economy. What will be some of the most pressing issues, pressing tasks for them as they enter this year's summit?
Well, it really gives me a flashback in the memories. I do remember in 2015, I was also in a delegation with the President Xi Jinping to South Africa, to Joburg. Actually, at that time, we're talking about the China and Africans cooperation. We're doing China-African Cooperation Forum. And at that time, I still remembered all the members joining the forum also are eager to know what we can solve our common problems together, which is poverty alleviation, which is sustainable development, which is mutual cooperation between China and Africa. Because at that moment, I remembered poverty alleviation can be a pressing issue for both of the continent, for both sides. And right now, I think we're heading back towards the same juncture of the moment. And why is that? Everybody knows we're having a very special backdrop in the geopolitical situation in the world economy. And more than ever, we need to form a new force to achieve the recovery of our economy and also stabilize the whole world geopolitical situation. But a lot of countries are facing uncertainties right now, and I think people want to achieve a better living standard to recover their own economy on one hand, but on the other hand, they don't want political strings attached. They don't want to choose side, because currently I think the world is more and more polarized. A lot of emerging economies, BRICS blocks, they just want to, okay, I want to stay away from this turbulence. I want to just fight for the benefit and the living standard for my own people. I just want to stay in peace and quiet and achieve my own development. But is there any choices by far? And I think this BRICS Summit provided such a platform for all the potential partners, because more than ever, this become a very valuable public product internationally right now. So I think right now they are facing uncertainties, but also they're in many hopes today to join this summit and to talk about their common concern, to achieve common solutions and find out the common vision and ways to achieve the common target. I think this is more than ever the most important thing we can achieve in the summit.
Yeah, we're seeing people are starting to exit the plane carrying the Chinese president. We should be able to see the president himself in just a few moments' time there. Einar, the BRICS members are banding together, trying to hash out solutions as they address the vulnerabilities, not just in their individual economies, but in the world economy as a whole. What solutions, what cooperation are they looking for the most as the summit kicks off?
Well, at this juncture, it's economic, and it's predictability and trust. What the world lacks right now with these kind of trade wars going on is the ability to see into the future, to make investments. And you've seen that being repeated throughout the world. This hits global South countries extremely hard when countries start pulling back on their foreign direct investment, jobs, everything starts to become in jeopardy. Obviously, debt is an issue. The environment, all of these things are there. This is really the problem, is that there are so many issues that are standing on the agenda that need to be addressed. But the absence of the G7 countries, the wealthiest countries on earth, is very telling. These middle powers cannot answer everything by themselves. You can't take the people who are in the middle and at the bottom and expect them to solve everything. So I think there has to be a plank in there where they start discussing how the world comes together, not just how the burden can be shifted from the wealthy to those less wealthy.
Mr. Chu, what do you think will be the main focus for China in the BRICS Summit this time? I mean, a lot of the countries that have submitted their applications say that they value the cooperation mechanism that has been established with BRICS, but they also value the role of China this time. So a lot of expectations on the shoulders, on the part of China, if you will. What do you think will be China's major focus and contribution as the members get together in South Africa?
Well, I think Chinese role here is really vital, because facing the current, well, let's say just the economy alone, facing the current situation, many people, many global South countries are facing still high inflation. They're facing the choke points in the supply chain. Now China is back online. China is fully reopened to the world economy and to bring in the productivity, to bring in the solutions, which is really, really important. Just consider about 1 year ago what we can see from the news in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan, in Chile, in Brazil, and many development partners. So if China is back online, we're seeing the value chain, the supply chain is restored. So this is really helpful for helping those countries, starting from the step one, to crack down the inflation, and then we're going to have a better chance, better odds to restore our monetary policy, and then our economy will be back ordered, and then our economy back online together. So this can be a really important step one. So when we restored our basic economic orders and living standard, and now what's next is to have a longer vision. We can talk about the sustainabilities in our economy and our development. So you see, EV is right now a very hot topic among all the developing nations, because in the past 2 years, geopolitical conflicts make everybody understand how important it is to make sure that your transportation is sustainable, your productivity is sustainable. China is bringing back the new trend of the EV and new trend of the solar farm, wind farm. This is really vital for those global south countries who maybe are not in charge of their own energy and export and import. And also, let's talk about the political side, as I just mentioned. A lot of countries, global south countries or new development partners, they really don't want to choose sides. They just really want to stay peaceful. They just want to be independent and achieve their own development. They want such kind of a platform. Well, let's talk about 60 years ago. 60 years ago, we don't quite have the luxury to enjoy this kind of a new platform, this independent platform, even though people are trying to form non-alliance movement and etc. But now we do have the capability to say, okay, the global south country now can stand out and stand up to achieve such kind of platform with between themselves. And this can help those countries to stand together, unified in solidarity, to create a development circumstance for themselves. So I think this is something China can contribute really to achieve this community with shared fate.
Einar, I mean, China is slowly emerging from the shadows of the pandemic, but it's also faced with challenges in its domestic economy on multiple fronts. How does that impact China's standing within BRICS? Is it still in a strong position to continue to contribute to BRICS?
Well, absolutely. China is unique in the sense that the other four countries are basically resource countries. China has the production, it has markets, it has export, it has advanced technology. So it's really, really important that China establishes that they're willing to share, that this is not a situation where they're going to try to play keep away with all the good things. And in terms of what China brings to the table, it's an inclusive, sustainable vision. Right now, many of the countries in the BRICS are, rightly preoccupied with Russia, its security, with Brazil, obviously economics, South Africa as well. India is very interested in balancing its power. But China comes to the table and says, listen, there has to be a way we can work together. What's been happening with RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the Belt and Road Initiative. These are all things where China has been pushing forward, not talking about frameworks or what could happen or, all these things in the future, but really concentrating on leading by example. And this is the most important because we just haven't seen that coming out of the other major powers.
I mean, in addition to an inclusive and sustainable vision that China is bringing to the table, it's also been providing the Belt and Road Initiative to not just BRICS countries, but other emerging economies as well. Mr. Chu, can you shed light on how the Belt and Road Initiative, we're celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. Can you shed light on how that initiative is bringing BRICS countries together?
Oh, yes. Actually, ever since 2013, I've been part of the visiting groups from China to Africa, joining with the Belt and Road Initiative, all kinds of projects in here. Well, I can tell you.
Well, there we see the Chinese president exiting the cabin. Mr. Chu, that thought will be coming back to you in a few moments' time. The Chinese president exiting the cabin of the plane. He touched down in the airport in Johannesburg, officially beginning his trip to the 15th BRICS Summit in Johannesburg this time. He will also be there for a state visit at the invitation of South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. This is actually President Xi's fourth state visit to South Africa, and this year marks the 25th anniversary of the establishment of China-South Africa diplomatic ties. In 2013, he made his first trip as president to South Africa and attended the 5th BRICS Summit in Durban. In 2015, he paid another state visit to the country, during which he chaired the Johannesburg Summit and the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. A little welcome ceremony being rolled out for the visiting Chinese president right there at the airport in Johannesburg. In 2018, the Chinese president traveled to South Africa again to celebrate the 20 years of diplomatic ties between the two countries. During the trip, Xi also attended the 10th BRICS Summit in Johannesburg and established a comprehensive strategic partnership with South Africa. These visits indicate strong ties and cooperation between China and South Africa. You see a lot of high-level official exchange there between the two countries. In June this year, actually, Xi Jinping, in a phone conversation with South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, both leaders agreed on building a high-level China-South Africa community with a shared future. Still a welcome ceremony ongoing for the Chinese president, who has just arrived in Johannesburg, South Africa. He's there for the 15th BRICS Summit hosted by South Africa this year, and also for a state visit at the invitation of President Cyril Ramaphosa. A lot of singing and dancing going on there in the middle of the night to welcome the visiting Chinese president. China says the two countries share a comprehensive strategic partnership of higher quality and a wider range. Both China and South Africa have always stressed political mutual respect and trust, especially on issues of core interest and concern for each other. China has remained South Africa's largest trading partner for 14 consecutive years, and South Africa, China's largest trading partner in Africa for 13 consecutive years. They cooperate extensively in fields of culture, education, tourism, science and technology, health, and sports. And during this state visit, President Xi and President Ramaphosa will exchange their views in depth on bilateral ties in China-Africa relations, BRICS cooperation, as well as global and regional issues. Here, the motorcade is starting to move. And you're looking at the live pictures of the airport in Johannesburg, where a welcome ceremony has been rolled out for visiting Chinese President Xi Jinping. All right, those are live pictures coming in from the airport in Johannesburg. The motorcade is carrying the Chinese president away from the airport. The summit starts tomorrow. We'll keep you posted on what comes out of the 15th BRICS Summit in Johannesburg. Let's continue our discussion with my guests here. Mr. Chu, sorry to interrupt you just now. If you remember where we left off, please go ahead.
Oh, yes. As a personal participant for the Belt and Road cooperation between China and African countries, I do have a lot of things to say. Well, I still remember my first trip to Africa is in 2009. And that time, when you just go to Africa, you don't see much of the presence of the cooperation between China and Africa, or even between BRICS countries and the African continent. But when next time I go to Africa, which is a parallel meeting with President Xi's visit to Africa, you find out everything starts to change because Belt and Road was already in place, and you see many enterprises, Chinese SOE, Chinese private companies, or even a Papa Mama run operated businesses are in Africa. And not only China, you see many other BRICS countries or Global South Development Partner countries, businesses are in Africa already. It's very different from 100 years ago because if you come to Africa 100 years ago or even 50 years ago, you find out that there are only two kinds of businesses. One is the big giant companies from the West, and then poor or small businesses in local places. But now everything changed. You for the first time find out global South countries can work together, develop together, and prosper together through business cooperation, political cooperation, and culture exchange. And by 2018, when I again visited Africa, I find out this kind of cooperation is mushrooming and blooming everywhere. It's not only in the scale and the size and the quantity, but also in their levels. Now, if you go to South Africa, you are seeing not only the lower level cooperation in the labor-intensive industry, but you see renewable energies by EEC, which is the Beijing company, Beijing automobile industry from my hometown. And then you see they are building their first big, very important assembly factory in South Africa. Generated many incomes for the local government and the jobs. So today, if you visit Africa, not only South Africa, but the whole Africa continent, you'll find out China alone are creating trillions worth of US dollar of size of GDP to the whole continent. We're hiring more than 500,000 together aggregated labor forces in the whole continent. And also, if you see the whole ripple effect, you find out the whole BRICS cooperation mechanisms working together are creating more than millions of the jobs, are creating millions of the job opportunities and trillions of GDPs for the continent. This is the magic of the Belt and Road Cooperation, and this is the magic of the mechanism of the BRICS countries.
I know you will want to add on to this as well. Let me come back to you later in our program. But for now, the Chinese president's trip is also a state visit. President Xi Jinping will meet with his South African counterpart Cyril Ramaphosa on bilateral ties and key international issues. The two leaders will also co-chair the China-Africa Leaders Dialogue. For more, let's go live again to CGTN reporters Sun Ye and Robert Nagila. Robert, what is on the agenda of Xi Jinping's state visit to South Africa?
Well, it's a very special relationship, the ties between China and South Africa. This is a relationship that's grown in leaps and bounds over the past 2 decades and is just really strong. Now, tomorrow we expect President Xi Jinping to meet with his host, President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, at the Union Buildings in Pretoria here in South Africa. This is where, this is the official office of the president and government offices as well. Now, we expect them to hold bilateral talks, which will be centered around strengthening ties between the two countries. This is a strategic partnership, but we expect them to discuss about how they can strengthen cooperation on development matters, especially South Africa being a very strong anchor state on the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, among some of the agreements we expect to come out of this talks are, we all know that South Africa has been going through a nightmare when it comes to electricity. There have been severe blackouts across the entire country, so we expect some agreement in that particular area. We know that China has got expertise and technical know-how in this particular area. We also expect agreements in energy infrastructure. We expect agreements in investment, trade, and strengthening ties between the two countries. And of course, science and technology. We know that China is a leading force in technology in various spheres. So we expect quite a bit to come out of those talks. And as I said, a very special relationship between the two countries, Sun Ye.
Right, of course, and you are saying it really right, because China and South Africa are growing together on a very solid foundation. And this year is very special. China and South Africa is celebrating 25 years of diplomatic ties, and Chinese President Xi Jinping had said that now China and South Africa are in a golden era for bilateral ties. Now China is South Africa's biggest trading partner, and South Africa is the biggest trading partner for China in Africa. And of course, South Africa is the first country in Africa to sign the Belt and Road Initiative as cooperative document. So they have really good footing. And what we have found in the last few days is that many Chinese companies have also come to make South Africa home. We've been talking to one of the Chinese home appliances giant, the Hisense. Now we know they are big in China, but now also 40% of all the televisions in South African homes are made by Hisense. And Hisense also have a huge industrial park in South Africa that's putting out 1 million TV sets every year. And what's more impressive perhaps is that Chinese companies here, they say they've seen more Chinese companies in the past 2 years coming to South Africa, and that really shows how China and perhaps other Chinese businesses believe in the growth and in the prospects of South Africa. And maybe that will be the other thing we are going to witness in the next few days when the state visit is on.
Absolutely, because China is South Africa's largest trading partner. In fact, it's been South Africa's largest trading partner for the last 13, 14 years, showing you just how strong that relationship is. So expect them to upgrade this relationship over the coming days, especially during those talks tomorrow. But I think for South Africans, what they'll be looking at is to see what sort of assistance, what sort of help they can get towards their energy sector, especially where electricity is concerned. That will be a big thing for them. But like I said, we expect agreements in a number of areas, including science, technology, and so on. So it is a big deal, and this is all happening before the BRICS Summit kicks off. So quite a number of pluses for both sides. As President Xi Jinping has always said, the relationship has to be a win-win for both sides for it to make any sense. And that's what we are seeing, especially where South Africa and China are concerned. Back to you.
Robert and Sun Ye, thank you so much again. Appreciate those updates from you. The admission of new members into the BRICS grouping will be a key topic on the agenda. Earlier this month, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva said he supports more countries joining the group. Meanwhile, in Brazil, entrepreneurs are seeking opportunities through BRICS. Let's go live now to Paulo Cabral in Sao Paulo. Paulo, help us understand what role Brazil plays in the BRICS cooperation mechanism.
Well, look, Brazil is a strong, and particularly the government of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva is a strong enthusiast of the BRICS. We have to remember that Brazil is one of the founding members of the BRICS during the first government of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who was one of the proponents of the formalization of this group. So Brazil brings this intention of strengthening the BRICS, particularly as a political tool, also leading to trade and economic goals, economic objectives. So Brazil has very much interest, a lot of interest in expanding its trade with the world, and particularly with the so-called global south, other developing nations, and to foster these relationships. So for Brazil, it's a strong instrument, this group, to pursue this policy that has both political and economic trade objectives.
Paulo, we know President Lula da Silva is a big supporter of expanded membership, is a big supporter of trading with local currencies. What can we expect from the president's participation in the summit this time? What will be his focuses?
Well, we have to remember also that Brazil comes from a period before the government of Lula, of Jair Bolsonaro, that did not favor that much the relationship with developing nations, with the BRICS, with the so-called Global South, but rather stirred Brazil's relationships towards the United States particularly, and also the European Union in a second place. Now, with the return of the Workers' Party of Lula to power, the government has started to give more attention to its external policy. Brazil wants to regain a status that it already had as an international player a few years ago. So we could say that besides any practical objectives, increasing trade or anything like that, this plays a very important role for President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva to put Brazil again in the international stage as a significant player. And then there is, of course, the issue of the possibility of using other currencies in international trade other than the US dollar that dominates the sector today. Lula da Silva is also a strong proponent of this idea, and it's also something that we are likely to hear him talking quite a lot about during the summit. And also, since he will be in Africa and thinking of this idea of Brazil regaining its status as an international player, he'll also take the opportunity to travel to Angola and to São Tomé and Príncipe, which are also important steps in this objective of having more relations with the Global South, and then Africa becomes a very important region for Brazil as well.
Our Paulo Cabral live for us in Sao Paulo today. Paulo, thank you so much. And my colleague Jiao Yang earlier spoke with the ambassador of South Africa to China. He explained Africa's role in this year's BRICS Summit and why the BRICS mechanism is attractive to many countries.
As you see, the theme we've chosen is an appealing theme. Let's look at key things which we can do as developing countries. When you say partnership, I like to stress BRICS is a partnership. It's not a bloc. We're not competing with any other blocs. We're a partnership for development. We're a partnership for inclusive multilateralism. The first thing that we agreed with our BRICS partners for this year's theme, that let's prioritize what you call just energy transition. We're developing countries, we're still using quite a lot of fossil fuels, but we're quickly transforming this by adding renewable energies. But how do we do that in a manner that doesn't compromise your own people and transform their skills so they can adapt to new technologies? We're sharing those skills. We're saying we must help the world to recover from the pandemic. We're saying let's talk peace and multilateralism. Let's reform the UN's global governance system, including UN, to be inclusive, and even pushing the issue of the role of women, particularly in peace processes. We believe if we can involve more women in peace processes, our peace processes will be more stable than the current system. So those are good things which we are saying for the BRICS partners moving forward. That's why there's so much interest of people who want to join the BRICS because of direct benefits of BRICS.
And our Mr. Chu Qiang, we still have a little bit of time before we wrap up our special program today. I do want to talk to you about the theme for this year's BRICS Summit. We know the theme for the 2023 BRICS Summit is BRICS and Africa Partnership for Mutually Accelerated Growth, Sustainable Development, and Inclusive Multilateralism. Einar, how do you understand the theme this year?
Well, I mean, Africa has been very hard hit by the current economic headwinds, and between debt, the needs to address climate change, the economic basics there, I mean, even down to food, there's a lot of unrest. In the Seychelles area, you've seen, Sahel area, you've seen tremendous amount of unrest, coups, etc. China and Africa, as well as all of the BRICS, have to embrace this idea about security, civilization, and development. And this is what I go back to. This is what China is offering. It's this vision of how countries, multilateral countries, can come together and cooperate. And you have to have a basis for that. It's fine to be very enthusiastic about new groupings, but in the end, they have to work. So the question is, how do you put these principles in practice? How do you get countries to stop interfering in the affairs of other countries? How do you help them develop their economies? And how do you make sure that they are secure? Part of that is civilization. And the reason I say that is if we were 20 years ago, basically all you needed to know was your country and America. America was a unipolar power. Today, with multilateralism, you really have to know all of the countries that you're dealing with. And I don't mean just their languages. You have to understand their philosophy, their history, their culture, their languages, and beyond that, how the rhythm of their lives. That way you can start building the kind of trust that's necessary to have between countries who have to cooperate. Remember, this is a consensus model that is coming forward. It is abandoning the corporatism, this idea that if you have 51%, you just tell people what to do. This is not the way it works, and especially with BRICS, and they've shown that. It's something where they come together, there's peer review, there's an understanding, and they come to some sort of decision based on everyone accepting it. Not everyone being happy, but everyone accepting it.
Mr. Chu, what do you think? Some of the countries that have applied to join BRICS are African countries. Why is BRICS attractive to African countries at this point? And to what extent do you think the BRICS mechanism can open up policy space for African nations to pursue economic development? How will it provide them with a sense of equity and fairness?
Well, I would like to give my audience some vivid pictures rather than only theories and descriptions. Because as I mentioned, as the personal participants into all this journey and all this BRICS cooperation and China-African cooperations, I personally witnessed such kind of the changes that you just mentioned. And that can explain why a lot of other countries would like to join this mechanism and how well it's been working, and why South Africans are saying that China and South Africa, China and Africa are in its best day. Well, my first visit to Mauritius, which is a very, very small island country, a marginal country in Africa, they used to be very, very poor. You know, back in the colonial time, Mauritius is just a farming country. Their only role in the global economy is to plant the sugarcane and some certain small amount of coffee to Western countries, very poor. But after the 2013, after the whole meeting is there, the whole wheel has been starting to run. Nowadays, if you go to Mauritius, you find out many modern businesses are there. But Mauritius has become a very important and modernized hub for the financial industry into Africa, becomes a gateway into Africa. Now you go to there, you find out many BRICS countries, companies are there, and everybody's calling it the Hong Kong of Africa. And also another example is Rwanda. Rwanda is a country used to restored from the ashes and the relics of the war. Brutal wars, and the whole country is desperate. And now if you go to Rwanda, you find out after 2013, after 10 years of development through the BRICS mechanism, the Belt and Road Project, this country becomes Africa's Singapore. It's so disciplined, very safe, very developed. So why today we're talking about the whole theme of this new summit is called the accelerated recovery. Maybe if you're not familiar with Africa, you probably are picturing, okay, the recovery means we're bringing food, we're bringing electricity back onto this continent again. No, this is actually a very old mindset. If you go to those countries, find out that what they call recovery is bringing back the higher level of cooperation again back online, financing, green development, green development equipment, a digital platform. And African countries do not want to repeat the lower level of development again. They're now seeking a new and a higher target. They want to be African New York. They want to be African Switzerland. They want to be African Beijing and Shanghai. So these are the new meanings of this development goals, and that's the reason why we're calling it the accelerated recovery, and that's the why more of the countries would like to apply for this new membership just come to this today's African countries, come to this land, you will find out how it really works.
Einar, let's spend a little time talking about global governance here. BRICS nations have pledged to facilitate global governance and help address risks regarding global energy, food security, as well as climate change. How can African nations, especially the vulnerable ones, engage in mutually beneficial cooperation with BRICS in these aspects?
Development and education. I mean, quite frankly, you don't want a situation where you're giving somebody a fish every day. You need to teach them to fish. Many African countries have to kind of recalibrate the ideas of trying to follow international aid packages and trying to get money from the UN. Those days are gone. I mean, if you go back many years ago, there was a book by Dambisa Moyo called Dead Aid, which simply looked at the development of African countries based on the amount of aid that they had. And there was an inverse relationship. Those countries that generally got the most aid had the lowest economic development index, whereas those who had the least had the highest. Africa has learned a lot since that period, but that has to continue on. But it's development within these countries, aided by trade. Quite frankly, you have to have something that's sustainable. These countries have to develop the resources, or as Rwanda did, they have very, very low resources per person, but they decided to put all of their money, or as much as they could, into education. So it has one of the highest literacy rates on the continent, even though it has the highest percentage of population per square kilometer. They have been able to make inroads and do something with their country. So it shows that regardless of what kind of obstacles you have in front of you, that there is a path forward, but you have to discover it from within your country. It's not something other countries are going to tell you to do, or they're going to, quote, help you do by exploiting you. This has to be a mutual relationship, and I think that's clearly what the Belt and Road has shown countries around the world.
Mr. Chu, we don't have a lot of time left. I love the perspectives you put forward just now. They want to have the next New York, they want to have the next Zurich, they want to have the next Shanghai, but that's clearly not enough. We're going to need cooperation from Africa when we address some of the world's most pressing issues, food and energy security, climate change. As they push for their economic visions, how can they also participate actively in those critical issues that concern not just the African continent, but the entire world?
Well, I think Africa more than anyone to understand the common challenges, because they are one of the most serious victims towards all these challenges. Climate change destroyed many countries' livelihood in the past, and also pollution, and also digital transformation. These are mostly understood by many African countries. And just like my coworker Anna just mentioned, China and the BRICS country mechanism is very different. We are teaching them to fish. We're empowering this continent rather than just take away the resource and just sell them some product and that's it. We're building factories. We're training talents. We're working together as a new team, a new force in this international arena to gear up Africa to face the common challenges. And I think people are not blind. When they visit Africa from year and year, from 2013 to 18 and to this year, you can see everything has been changing positively with your own eyes. And after seeing that, you're going to believe this mechanism is working, and the people will understand the new narrative, will understand how it works, and that can be they can be spread to the rest part of the world.
Einar Tangen, Qi Qiang, again, a pleasure to have both of you on. It's very early morning here in Beijing. Thank you again for making time for us today. And with that, we come to the end of our special program this hour on the BRICS Summit. I'm Zhong Shi. On behalf of the entire team in Beijing, thank you so much for your company, and news continues on CGTN.